Okay, you know Roald Dahl. When you hear that name, you probably instantly picture the BFG peering into a window, or maybe that terrible hulking figure of Miss Trunchbull, demanding a child be flung across a courtyard.
Right.
You might have grown up reading Matilda, or maybe like me, secretly wishing you could move objects with your mind. Or maybe you just dipped your toe into the marvelous, mischievous world of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
What if we told you that the gentle, whimsical genius who dreamed up everlasting gobstoppers and the big friendly giant actually lived a life so complex, so full of violence, trauma, and high-stakes adventure, that his biography reads less like a literary history and, well, more like an espionage thriller.
Seriously.
We are talking about a man who was a genuine World War II flying ace, a high-level intelligence operative embedded in Washington, D.C., and incredibly, an inventor of medical devices that literally saved thousands of children worldwide.
It's wild, the public persona, the gentle mischief maker. It totally obscures a life lived at these extremes. Today, we are not just discussing an author. We are really analyzing a figure whose personal narrative was, well, as fantastical and complex as any of his fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the scale of his success truly underpins why this deep dive is so essential.
No.
We're talking about an author who has sold more than 300 million copies worldwide.
300 million?
Yeah. His books have been translated and published in, 63 languages, leading many to call him, quite rightly, I think, one of the greatest storytellers for children of the 20th century.
Absolutely. And our mission today is precisely to bridge those two worlds for you. The extreme world of wartime trauma, sophisticated espionage, devastating personal grief, and medical innovation, to the unique, often macabre and darkly comic literary voice that ultimately defined him. We are peeling back the hidden chapters of his life to show you how these extreme experiences were not just, background noise in his biography, but the very raw, visceral material that actually forged his specific brand of storytelling.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning then. Dahl was born on September 13th, 1916, at Villa Marie in Cardiff, Wales. His parents, Harold and Sophie Magdalene Dahl, were affluent Norwegian immigrants.
That's right. His father, Harold, was a wealthy shipbroker who'd emigrated from Norway and married Sophie, who came from a similarly, well-established Norwegian family.
And his Norwegian roots run deep, don't they?
Oh, very deep. He was named after the famed Norwegian polar explorer, Roald Amundsen. And Norwegian was actually his first language at home.
Really?
Yeah, he spoke it with his parents and his sisters. It was a linguistic foundation that perhaps contributed to his later playful relationship with the English language, all those invented words.
Interesting connection. But tragedy struck pivotally and really early. In 1920, when Roald was just 4 years old.
Just 4.
His 7-year-old sister, Astrid, died suddenly from appendicitis. And then, only weeks after that, his 57-year-old father, Harold, died of pneumonia.
Weeks apart.
Imagine the emotional void left by the simultaneous deaths of 2 immediate family members for a 4-year-old. It must have been just immense.
This is an incredible upheaval, and it's critical because it led to Sophie Magdalene Dahl's definitive decision. Harold left a substantial fortune, assessed at over £158,000 back then, which, secured their financial future. But crucially, before his death, Harold had insisted that his children receive their education in English schools.
Right. He thought they were the best in the world.
He happened and regarded them as the world's finest. Exactly.
And Sophie honored that wish, right? She chose to remain in Wales, raising her children there, instead of doing what might have been easier, maybe, and returning to Norway to live with relatives.
Precisely. And this choice was the fundamental pivot point in Roald's life. It committed him to the strict, often brutal, British public school system, which, as he later wrote about extensively, became a profound source of misery and, paradoxically, maybe his greatest wellspring of inspiration.
Wow.
Had she returned to Norway, there would likely be no Miss Trunchbull.
That's a thought. Okay, before the real misery of boarding school set in, we get this moment of pure, juvenile mischief that directly seeded his fiction. Let's talk about the infamous Great Mouse Plot of 1924.
Oh, yes.
At age 8, Dahl and 4 of his friends decided to take revenge on the local sweet shop owner, a woman named Mrs. Pratchett, whom they considered mean and loathsome for her perpetual grimness.
Which is just such a dull description, isn't it? Mean and loathsome.
Totally. So they engineered what was, for a group of 8-year-olds, a truly elaborate prank, putting a dead mouse into a jar of gobstoppers.
Oh, my goodness. Dahl recalls the severity of the official response in his autobiography, Boy, Tales of Childhood, a caning for all 5 boys
Yeah.
delivered by the headmaster himself.
Ouch. But the literary payoff, as you pointed out, was invaluable. That mean and loathsome Mrs. Pratchett became the direct, tyrannical template for the cruel headmistress Miss Trunchbull in Matilda.
Absolutely. Straight line.
And the act of mischief itself, centered on those beloved British sweets, it inspired the creation of the magical, everlasting gobstopper in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You see how his earliest experiences are just directly translated into plot devices.
It's incredible, isn't it? His formal education, however, became increasingly difficult. He first attended St. Peter's boarding school in Weston-super-Mare, and apparently he was desperately homesick, writing to his mother every single week.
Every week.
Every week. After her death in 1967, he made a really poignant discovery. She had saved every single one of those homesick letters.
Oh.
Yeah, a testament to their close bond, though he had apparently rarely revealed the true depth of his unhappiness to her during those years. Trying to be brave, maybe.
Trying to protect her, perhaps. The real trauma, though, the violence that truly fueled the darker elements of his work, seems to have taken place at Repton School in Derbyshire from 1929 to 1934.
Yes. Repton.
He described the environment as characterized by pervasive ritual cruelty, hazing by older boys, and frequent, severe beatings administered by the masters. Biographers universally highlight that these violent experiences became, central to his adult identity and worldview.
Yeah, this is a foundational element for analyzing his fiction, absolutely. These brutal experiences fueled Dahl's persistent, lifelong hatred of cruelty and specifically corporal punishment. This hatred became the defining psychological characteristic of virtually every adult villain in his children's books.
He documented being appalled that masters and senior boys were allowed, quote, literally to wound other boys, and sometimes quite severely, without any fear and consequence. He famously said, I couldn't get over it, I never have got over it, and you can draw a straight line from that emotional scar to the tyranny of Miss Trunchbull, who just loves punishing children, or the absolute wickedness of the Grand High Witch, who views children not as humans, but as something.
Revolting, yes.
Exactly.
And there's that compelling, almost apocryphal anecdote about a specific caning incident involving his friend Michael, which Dahl originally attributed to the then headmaster, Geoffrey Fisher.
Who later became the Archbishop of Canterbury.
The very same. Dahl viewed the brutality of that specific caning as stemming from the headmaster's inherent enmity towards children, an attitude he perfectly projected onto the Grand High Witch later on.
Now, what's interesting is the historical confusion around that specific event, isn't there?
That's right. Historical records suggest the caning incident that left the deepest psychological mark may have actually occurred under Fisher's successor, J.T. Christie. However, for Dahl, the specific perpetrator was perhaps less important than the psychological impact.
Right, the feeling of injustice.
Exactly. That incident caused him profound disillusionment, causing him to doubt the sincerity of religion and organized faith itself, long before his later spiritual crisis related to his daughter's death. It planted a seed of doubt early on.
But Repton wasn't entirely grim, thankfully. It provided the ultimate fantasy catalyst for his future career, didn't it?
Yes. The chocolate. The Cadbury Chocolate Company, which was nearby, occasionally sent boxes of new chocolate bars to the school for the pupils to test and offer feedback.
Imagine that, being a schoolboy getting free Cadbury chocolate to test.
Think about that. Free chocolate, testing new inventions, being asked for your opinion by a major company for a kid. This exposure inspired Dahl's early daydream, the fantasy of inventing a new, perfect chocolate bar that would win the praise of Mr. Cadbury himself.
And that became the genuine genesis of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Absolutely. And his obsession with treats, sweets, and maybe most importantly, the magic of culinary invention throughout his career. It started right there.
Amazing. So after finishing school, Dahl firmly decided against university.
Yep, no uniform.
In 1934, he sought adventure instead. He crossed the Atlantic and hiked through Newfoundland. Then he joined the Shell Petroleum Company, training in the UK for 4 years before being assigned to the British colony of Tanganyika, which is now modern-day Tanzania.
And this period gave him his first real taste of exotic isolation and responsibility. He vividly describes this life in his autobiography, Going Solo. He was the youngest and most junior of only 3 young Englishmen running the entire Shell operation in that huge territory, a vast area requiring real logistical ingenuity.
And he lived in a kind of colonial luxury, right? In the shell house outside Dar es Salaam, complete with a cook and personal servants.
But his assignments took him across the territory, often alone, supplying oil to remote customers. And it was here he encountered truly dangerous wildlife, like black mamba snakes and lions. These experiences of exotic adventure really completed the first phase of the storyteller's training, you could say. Remote observation and high-stakes survival. So when the war in Europe began in August 1939, Dahl immediately transitioned into military service. He was commissioned as a lieutenant in the King's African Rifles, commanding a platoon of Askari men.
Right, leveraging his experience there.
Exactly. By November 1939, he joined the Royal Air Force, the RAF, as an aircraftman with the service number 774022.
He completed initial training in Nairobi before moving on to advanced flight training in Iraq. And here is where the reality of war just hits hard. The source material says only 3 of the 16 men he started flight training with ultimately survived the conflict.
Only 3 out of 16. It's a sobering statistic, isn't it? It really defines the atmosphere of, well, existential risk he was living under. He was commissioned as a pilot officer in August 1940, ready for active duty.
His initial combat posting, however, started not with some dramatic dogfight, but with a horrifying, almost bureaucratic accident.
Yeah, it's quite something. He was assigned to No. 80 Squadron RAF, flying Gloucester Gladiators. And it's important to understand why this matters. The Gladiator was the last biplane fighter aircraft used by the RAF.
A biplane in World War II.
Yeah, already obsolete by the time WWII started. It was slow, lightly armed, and dangerously exposed when facing modern German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109.
Okay, so on September 19th, 1940, flying these outdated biplanes, he and another pilot were ordered to fly their Gladiators from Egypt to a forward airstrip in Libya. This is where the error occurred.
They just couldn't find the airstrip. They were running dangerously low on fuel, and night was descending fast over the desert. Dahl was forced to attempt a landing in the Libyan desert, specifically, in what turned out to be no man's land between the Allied and Italian forces.
Oh, no.
The undercarriage of his Gladiator struck a boulder, the aircraft crashed violently, and he suffered life-threatening injuries. A fractured skull, a severely smashed nose, and temporary blindness due to massive swelling of the brain. It lasted 6 weeks.
6 weeks blind. And he managed to drag himself from the wreckage before losing consciousness, right?
He did. An RAF inquiry later confirmed that the entire catastrophe was basically due to being sent to the wrong location. A fatal governmental bureaucratic error that caused him severe personal cost.
That experience must have just permanently colored his view of authority and competence, surely.
Absolutely. You see that distrust throughout his work. And the experience of the crash itself, the injuries, had profound psychological and creative implications. Dahl himself later came to believe that the monumental bash on the head he sustained had actually caused his creative genius to emerge.
He really thought that.
He theorized that the head trauma had essentially turned a promising oil executive with no literary talents into the best-selling author he became.
Wow. That is such a fascinating sort of romantic idea that the trauma was the key to the genius. But what does the more clinical analysis suggest?
Well, analysts, treat the savant syndrome theory with a healthy dose of skepticism. It's highly unlikely he suddenly acquired a new literary skill out of nowhere. However, one specialist noted that the trauma may have caused mild localized damage to the frontal lobes.
The part for planning and judgment.
Exactly, and social inhibition. The analysis suggests this could have affected his personality, perhaps, quote, releasing him from some of the inbuilt inhibitions that normally hold people back.
So, not genius acquired, but inhibition released. Okay,
Yeah.
That makes so much sense when you look at his fiction. The anarchic spirit, the lack of fear in depicting the grotesque, the gleeful revenge that characterizes his writing, that could totally be the creative manifestation of those lowered inhibitions.
Precisely. It fits, doesn't it? Despite being severely wounded and having spent months recovering, he was deemed fit for flying duties in February 1941.
Unbelievable determination.
His squadron had been transferred to the Greek campaign and was re-equipped with Hawker Hurricanes, a massive leap forward from the obsolete Gladiators. Dahl flew a replacement Hurricane across the Mediterranean after only 7 hours of experience in that aircraft type. Just jumped in.
7 hours. Wow. He immediately plunged into high-intensity combat over Greece then.
Right away. He flew his first aerial combat mission on April 15, 1941, over Chalcis. He attacked 6 German Junkers Ju-88 bombers and shot one down. The following day, he shot down another Ju-88. Suddenly, he was right in the thick of it.
And he took part in a major decisive engagement on April 20th, 1941, didn't he? Alongside famous pilots like Pat Paddle.
That's right, the intense Battle of Athens, a small force of Allied fighters desperately trying to cover the evacuation of British troops. Dahl described it as an endless blur of enemy fighters whizzing towards me from every side. It was a desperate, bloody affair.
So by the time he was invalided home due to recurring blackouts, dizziness, and severe headaches, all residual effects of that 1940 crash,
Still plaguing him.
he had achieved confirmed status as a flying ace. Post-war cross-referencing credited him with 5 aerial victories, a genuine hero of the Greek campaign.
He really was. After convalescing, his service shifted drastically. In late March 1942, he was posted as Assistant Air Attaché at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. He was quickly promoted to War Substantive Flying Officer.
Okay, going from life-or-death combat in the skies over Greece to the, cocktail party circuit of wartime Washington must have been incredibly jarring.
It was profoundly jarring, by all accounts. Dahl arrived from war-starved Britain and was completely astounded by the wealth, the luxury, the sheer amenities available in North America. He strongly disliked the diplomatic job initially, finding it detached and superficial.
Didn't feel important enough.
He described feeling utterly out of place, calling it a most ungodly, unimportant job, feeling like he had moved directly from horrific combat to the middle of a pre-war cocktail party in America.
But the seemingly unimportant diplomatic role quickly morphed into something far more critical and covert, right? What was the real mission in D.C.?
Well, the official mission was promoting Britain's message and ensuring continued American support, especially as the U.S. had only recently entered the war following Pearl Harbor. They needed to combat the powerful isolationist movement known as America First, which still had significant influence.
So it required soft power, intelligence gathering.
Exactly. And this is where the intelligence work really comes in. He wasn't just schmoozing diplomats. He was actively working for aspiring.
Aspiring! Seriously?
Absolutely. He was recruited into the inner circle of the Canadian spy master William Stevenson, codenamed Intrepid. Stevenson ran the British Security Coordination, or BSC, which was effectively the intelligence and propaganda arm of MI6, operating out of New York and Washington.
Wait, so the man who gave us the witches was essentially working for MI6 alongside the future author of James Bond? What was that environment like?
It was apparently a very close-knit, elite, and rather glamorous circle of operatives. Dahl supplied intelligence directly to Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself.
No way.
Yeah. His specific job, often conducted in social settings, was to gauge the political atmosphere and keep Churchill updated on what was in the old boy's mind, the old boy being Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Wow.
He worked directly alongside Ian Fleming, who was a naval intelligence officer at the time, and David Ogilvy, the future advertising titan. They were all part of this British intelligence network in the U.S.
It's incredible to connect his later fiction, often involving highly secret plots and powerful figures manipulating events, to his real-life job navigating this high-stakes political landscape. It adds another layer.
It really does. And it was during this time that the writing opportunity materialized almost by accident. He met the noted British novelist C.S. Forester, who was writing propaganda for the Allied cause. Forester asked Dahl to simply write down some RAF anecdotes from the desert in Greece so Forester could shape them into a story.
Just jot some notes down.
Yeah, basically. But Forester recognized the unique voice immediately.
He saw the talent.
He did. After reading what Dahl had produced, Forster declared that he would publish it exactly as Dahl had written it. The piece, originally titled A Piece of Cake, detailed his crash. It was bought by the Saturday Evening Post for $1,000.
Which is like, what, $19,000 today? Decent first sale?
Not bad at all. The magazine renamed it the more dramatic Shot Down over Libya, even though technically he hadn't been shot down. This event marks his true accidental beginning as a professional writer.
But he didn't always play by the diplomatic rules, though, did he? He reportedly got into trouble with embassy officials and was supposedly sent back to Britain for misconduct at one point.
That's a story, yeah. But his importance to Stevenson's operation, to Intrepid, was apparently so high that it was immediately overridden. Stevenson sent him straight back to Washington, along with an effective promotion to the rank of wing commander.
Wow, so he was valuable.
Very valuable. He left the RAF finally in August 1946, deemed permanently unfit for further service due to the severe lingering effects of his 1940 injuries, holding the substantive rank of squadron leader. He completed the transformation, fighter ace to intelligence officer to now budding writer.
After the war, Dahl's life continued its tumultuous path, didn't it? Swinging between profound professional success and just devastating personal crises. In 1953, he married the American actress Patricia Neal.
That's right. A marriage that lasted 3 decades and produced 5 children: Olivia, Tessa, Theo, Ophelia, and Lucy.
And it's a nice detail that his granddaughter, Sophie Dahl, the author and former model, is the Sophie after whom the title character in the BFG is named.
It is lovely, yeah. But happiness was, sadly, frequently interrupted by crisis. A terrible event in 1960 led directly to an extraordinary moment of medical innovation that few people actually know about.
This is the story about his son, Theo.
Yes. Their 4-month-old son, Theo, was severely injured when his baby carriage was struck by a taxicab in New York City.
Oh, awful. And Theo suffered from severe hydrocephalus, often called water on the brain, as a result of the accident.
That's right. The condition is caused by an abnormal buildup of cerebrospinal fluid, and it often requires a shunt to drain the excess fluid and relieve pressure. But at the time, the existing shunts used to treat hydrocephalus were prone to mechanical failures.
They kept blocking up.
Exactly. Blockages and pressure problems, requiring repeated, dangerous operations on infants. Rather than passively accept the limitations of the existing medical equipment and the risk to his son, Dahl, well, he threw himself completely into solving the mechanical problem.
He just decided he'd fix it.
Basically. He collaborated with 2 experts, Stanley Wade, a hydraulic engineer specializing in miniature machinery, and Kenneth Till, a London neurosurgeon. Together, they invented a revolutionary device known as the Wade-Dahl-Till valve, or WDT valve.
The Wade-Dahl-Till.
The innovation of the WDT valve was critical. Previous devices often relied on rigid tubes or simplistic pressure relief. The WDT was designed with a much more effective, non-blocking mechanism. Essentially, a sophisticated shunt that managed fluid flow more dynamically using 2 tiny discs.
How did it work?
Well, when the fluid pressure became too high, the discs separated to allow the fluid to drain safely into the abdomen where it was absorbed. It was much more reliable.
And the source material confirms this valve was a resounding success, wasn't it? Used effectively on almost 3,000 children globally, alleviating the condition and reducing the number of risky surgical revisions required.
It really was a success. The great storyteller literally became an inventor who saved lives by applying his practical, almost engineering-minded determination to a critical medical problem.
Amazing. Despite that triumph, though, the family suffered another immense tragedy just 2 years later. In November 1962, their daughter, Olivia, died of measles encephalitis.
Yeah, a rare but often fatal complication of the measles virus. He was only 7 years old.
Only 7. Dahl recalled being left limp with despair, suffering an agonizing guilt that he had been powerless to help her, despite having just helped invent a life-saving device for his son.
That contrast. The triumph of the WDT valve and the utter helplessness against the measles virus must have been just shattering for him.
You can only imagine. That profound grief, much like his school trauma and war experiences, it galvanized him, but in a civic direction this time.
Right. It turned him into a fervent and eloquent proponent of immunization. In 1988, decades later, he wrote a widely circulated article, Measles, a Dangerous Illness, specifically urging people to vaccinate their children in response to rising case numbers in the UK.
So he channeled his personal sorrow into a public health service.
He did, and he dedicated his classic 1982 book, The BFG, to Olivia.
That grief also led to a significant moment of spiritual crisis, didn't it? Linking back to his earlier disillusionment at Repton.
Yes. In mourning, he sought guidance from Geoffrey Fisher, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, whom he had known from his school days. Remember the caning story?
Same guy, what happened?
Well, the story goes that Fisher told Dahl that while Olivia was surely in paradise, her beloved family dog, Rowley, would never join her there, as animals lacked souls.
Oh dear. How did Dahl react?
Dahl was apparently deeply dismayed and rejected Christianity entirely, viewing the entire system as a sham. He questioned if this great and famous churchman really knew what he was talking about and whether he knew anything at all about God or heaven.
Wow. So the loss of his daughter caused him to reject established religious authority, much like school trauma led him to reject educational authority earlier.
It seems that way, yes.
Yeah.
Another pillar knocked down by personal experience.
Then, just 3 years later, in 1965, his wife, Patricia Neal, suffered 3 burst cerebral aneurysms while pregnant with their youngest child, Lucy.
Another crisis. This event left her severely incapacitated, suffering from aphasia, the inability to speak, and paralysis on one side.
And the sources detail Dahl's response as one of intense, almost controlling dedication, right?
Yes. Very much so. He took strict control of her rehabilitation for months. He acted as a relentless taskmaster, apparently, leading her through punishing physical and speech therapy sessions, pushing her constantly, helping her relearn to talk and walk.
That sounds incredibly intense.
It does, but this intense period of rehabilitation eventually allowed her to make an almost miraculous return to acting. Their arduous struggle was later dramatized in the 1981 film, The Patricia Neal Story.
Okay, before we delve deeper into his writing style itself, we really must address the most complex and, frankly, damaging aspect of his later public life, the allegations and subsequent confirmation of his anti-Semitism, which is thoroughly documented in the source material.
Yes, it's unavoidable and important to cover impartially.
It is essential for our deep dive to impartially report on the statements he made which caused such lasting damage to his public image and legacy.
Okay, the controversy first erupted in August 1983 when Dahl reviewed Tony Clifton's book, God Cried, which focused on the siege of West Beirut by the Israeli army during the 1982 Lebanon War. The article, published in the Literary Review, drew immediate and widespread fire.
And what did he say?
In it, Dahl stated that Jews had never switched so rapidly from much-pitied victims to barbarous murderers. Very strong language.
Wow. He claimed at that time to be anti-Israel, but not anti-Semitic, is that right?
That was his claim then, yes. However, his statements escalated later in his life, proving that distinction was, well, thin at best, or perhaps non-existent for him by then.
When did it escalate?
That distinction really dissolved in 1990 when Dahl spoke again on the Lebanon invasion. He stated explicitly, quote, "I'm certainly anti-Israeli, and I've become anti-Semitic inasmuch as that you get a Jewish person in another country like England strongly supporting Zionism."
Oh, that's unambiguous.
Very. He went on to make shocking and baseless claims, asserting that Jewish people control the media. These comments became defining features of the controversy and cemented the view of him as anti-Semitic.
And how did people react at the time? His friends, colleagues?
The comments prompted immediate reactions, highlighting what some saw as inconsistency in his character. The renowned Jewish philosopher Sir Isaiah Berlin described Dahl as a man who simply followed whims, meaning he would blow up in one direction, so to speak, suggesting perhaps that his views were erratic rather than based on a deeply held, consistent political philosophy. But the words themselves were deeply offensive regardless.
Erratic or not, the real-world consequence of these statements was significant, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. One notable repercussion was in 2014 when the Royal Mint decided not to produce a coin to commemorate the centenary of his birth, specifically because of these anti-Semitic views.
That's a major statement from a national institution.
It is. And the gravity of the comments eventually led his family to respond. In 2020, they published a statement on the official Roald Dahl website apologizing for the hurt caused by his anti-Semitism.
It's also worth noting his complex relationship with official honors and the establishment, right? In 1986, he was offered an appointment to Officer of the Order of the British Empire, the OBE.
A significant honor.
But he turned it down. Reports suggest he refused because he actually wanted a knighthood. Specifically so, his wife, Patricia Neal, could be titled Lady Dahl, recognizing her own career and struggles.
Interesting motivation, if true. Despite his controversies and rejections of official honors, though, his charitable efforts were notable in the final years of his life, specifically around dyslexia awareness.
Ah, yes, the Vicar of Nibbleswick.
Exactly. In 1990, he assisted the British Dyslexia Association's awareness campaign, writing one of his final books, The Vicar of Nibbleswick. This comic tale about a vicar who suffers a fictitious type of dyslexia, causing him to pronounce words backwards. Well, he had all its rights donated entirely to the Dyslexia Institute in London.
So, demonstrating a consistent impulse toward philanthropy, even late in life, alongside all the complexity.
Yes, that seems fair to say. A very complicated figure. Moving back to his literary output, it's really vital to appreciate that Dahl maintained a highly successful dual career simultaneously. He wasn't just writing for children. He was also renowned for his macabre adult short stories.
Right, those really dark ones.
Celebrated for their unique blend of black humor, psychological suspense, and most importantly, perhaps, their shocking, often morally ambiguous plot twists.
Those collections like Kiss Kiss and Tales of the Unexpected, they really cemented his reputation as a master of the concise, dark twist ending. He was highly regarded even by the crime and mystery community, wasn't he? Receiving 3 Edgar Awards from the Mystery Writers of America for his adult work.
That's right, 3 Edgar Awards. pretty impressive. The first of the collection, Someone Like You in 1954, then for the classic story The Landlady in 1959, and finally for the television episode based on his story Skin in 1980. This recognition proves his mastery extended far beyond the realm of children's fiction.
One of his most enduring adult stories is Man from the South, right? Sometimes called The Smoker. That's a true classic of suspense fiction.
Oh, absolutely. The story, set in Jamaica, concerns an elderly man who makes this high-stakes, almost unthinkable wager with a younger visitor, involving the visitor's fingers and a Cadillac.
It's chilling.
What defines that story, and much of his adult fiction, is the slow, agonizing buildup of tension and the moral ambiguity of the characters, culminating in a sudden, shocking reversal or revelation. It's been adapted multiple times, including that famous 1960 episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, starring Steve McQueen and Peter Lorre,
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
and later adapted into Quentin Tarantino's segment of the film Four Rooms. The structure of the payoff, the swift retribution or twist, it's remarkably similar whether he is writing about a murderer or a mean headmistress.
That's a great point. His children's fiction, however, utilized a distinctive and powerful formula, rooted largely, as we discussed, in his traumatic experiences at boarding school.
Definitely. The core narrative is almost always told from the powerless child's perspective, featuring villainous adults who despise children. But crucially, usually including at least one good adult figure, like the BFG or Mrs. Phelps the librarian, to counteract the cruelty and offer hope.
And the psychological resonance of his work stems from this framework, right? As one critic, Anna Leskiewicz, pointed out, his success comes from his ability to wriggle directly into children's fantasies and fears, and then lay them out with anarchic delight.
Well put. His books are essentially protests against unfairness, which is why the adult villains are drawn in such terrifying hyperbolic detail, only to be brought tumbling down by some form of retributive, often bizarre justice.
In 2007, a TV special distilled his creative methods into what they called Roald Dahl's revolting rulebook, outlining 8 rules he seemed to follow in his craft. Maybe if we explore these, you can see how his life directly translated into his art.
Okay, sounds good.
Oh.
Let's break down a few of the core rules. Rule number 1, just add chocolate.
Obviously.
A clear nod back to his Cadbury testing days at Repton, elevating sweets from just a treat to a source of pure, liberating fantasy. Rule number 2, adults can be scary.
Definitely stems directly from his school trauma and justifies the tyranny of figures like Miss Trunchbull or Aunt Spiker and Aunt Sponge.
Absolutely. And then there's the philosophy behind the action. Rule number 4, revenge is sweet. This is the moral engine of his universe, isn't it?
Totally. Think of Matilda using her telekinesis to enact justice on the terrifying adults in her life. Or George in George's Marvelous Medicine.
Right. Rule number 5, keep a wicked sense of humor, which allows him to juxtapose the truly grotesque with moments of laugh-out-loud absurdity, easing the intensity for young readers.
And we mustn't forget rule number 6, pick perfect pictures.
Quentin Blake.
Referencing his long and incredibly successful collaboration with illustrator Quentin Blake, whose loose, energetic style perfectly mirrored Dahl's anarchic tone. They were a perfect match.
They really were. And rule number 8, food is fun. It's either a source of pure joy, like the chocolate factory, or sometimes horror, like the Trunchbull's gargantuan cake punishment.
Ugh, that cake scene. If we look closely at those archetypes, the good adult figures, like the big friendly giant, are essential for establishing that warm underlying sentiment, as you said. But the grotesque side is often best exemplified in the punishments he reserved for what he wrote as fat characters, who are almost universally portrayed as gluttonous or unpleasant.
Yes, that's an aspect that has drawn criticism more recently, but it's definitely there. The punishment is swift, visceral, and often food-related. Consider Augustus Gloop in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He ignores every warning about his gluttony, falls into the chocolate river, and gets sucked up a pipe, nearly turned into fudge.
Or the scene in Matilda where Bruce Bogtrotter, the boy who steals cake, is forced to eat an entire gigantic chocolate cake by Miss Trunchbull.
A truly monstrous cake.
Only for her to smash the plate over his head once he somehow succeeds in the impossible task.
It's pure humiliation and excess. Or think of Aunt Sponge in James and the Giant Peach, who is described as enormous and unpleasant. Her punishment is environmental. She is just flattened to death by the enormous peach itself.
These are not subtle punishments, are they? They are symbolic, almost ancient reactions against tyranny, gluttony, and unchecked authority.
Exactly. But the storytelling power is equally found in his language itself. Dahl was a master inventor of words, becoming a genuine, if unofficial, lexicographer. He invented over 500 new words, apparently.
500, many of which are now recognizable terms within the canon of children's literature, like Oompa Loompa or whiz-popping.
And the linguistic mechanics behind this invention are fascinating. He didn't just invent words from thin air. He usually built them on familiar sounds, using onomatopoeia, playing with sounds, and humorously combining existing words, often swapping letters around, like gobblefunk.
So this technique means the words are immediately intelligible to a child, even if they aren't explicitly defined in the text. They sound like what they mean.
Exactly. The lexicographer Susan Rennie noted that words like scrumdiddlyumptious, meaning utterly delicious food, is an example of a Dahl word that has actually escaped his world and entered common usage. Think also of fizzlecrump or snozcumber. They use familiar consonants and sounds to convey something humorous and physical or just plain disgusting.
He clearly loved playing with language. And where did all this genius happen? He did not write in some grand study lined with leather-bound books, did he?
Not at all. He wrote in a traditional romanical vardo, a kind of old gypsy caravan, set up in the garden of his home, Gypsy House, in Great Missenden.
A caravan in the garden.
He modeled this unique writing room after the peaceful, isolated shed used by the poet Dylan Thomas. Dahl considered Thomas the greatest poet of our time, apparently, and clearly sought to replicate that sense of isolated creative concentration.
And that Vardo, that caravan, later became central to the plot of his book, Danny, the Champion of the World, didn't it?
It did indeed. Art imitating life, or his writing space anyway.
As we touched on earlier, his relationship with the adaptation of his work was highly strained sometimes, particularly concerning the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Ah, yes, the Gene Wilder one.
Although he contributed to the script, he ultimately disowned the final product.
His disappointment was legendary. He was reportedly infuriated because he felt the film placed too much emphasis on Willy Wonka, portrayed brilliantly but perhaps dominantly by Gene Wilder, and too little on Charlie, who was the true protagonist of the book for Dahl.
And he hated the changes to the plot.
Furthermore, yes, he was genuinely infuriated by plot deviations made by the screenwriter David Seltzer. His anger over this film deviation led directly to his refusal to allow any further major versions of the book to be made during his lifetime. He was very protective.
This proprietary attitude brings us directly to the recent, highly public debate about text revisions, doesn't it? In 2023, Puffin Books published new editions that incorporated hundreds of changes advised by sensitivity readers.
That caused quite a stir.
The stated goal was to remove potentially offensive language, such as changing the word fat to enormous when describing certain characters, removing words like crazy and mad, and making language gender neutral where possible.
This move met with immediate and widespread criticism across the literary world. Several public figures, including Salman Rushdie, called it absurd censorship and a mutilation of the original text.
And the historical irony here is profound, isn't it? The source material indicates that Dahl, when he was alive, had threatened publishers with a crocodile if they ever dared to change so much as a comma of his words.
He was fiercely protective of his text. The backlash forced a partial retreat by the publisher, Puffin. They subsequently announced they would release an unedited selection of the books as the Roald Dahl Classic Collection, acknowledging the importance of keeping the classic original texts in print despite the sensitivity concerns.
So the debate perfectly highlighted how fiercely protective readers are of the original anarchy and, well, the subversive voice of Dahl, warts and all.
It really did. Nonetheless, his enduring influence is just unquestionable. Director Tim Burton cited Dahl as a major influence for his ability to mix light and darkness, and for his politically incorrect humor the kids get, which resonates strongly with his own dark Gothic style.
You can definitely see the connection there. Even contemporary literary giants acknowledge his legacy. J.K. Rowling, creator of the Harry Potter series, acknowledged his influence, and critics noted the striking similarities between Dahl's wicked guardians like Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, or Mr. and Mrs. Twit, and her own depiction of the Dursley family.
That comparison is often made, yeah. And the commercial influence has only solidified in the digital age. In 2021, Netflix acquired the entire Roald Dahl story company in a deal worth more than $500 million.
£500 million.
Confirming his position as a global cultural giant. His work is still being remade, reinterpreted, and celebrated everywhere, proving that his unique blend of mayhem and morality remains essential reading for generations.
Roald Dahl died on November 23, 1990, at the age of 74 from myelodysplastic syndrome, which is a rare cancer of the blood, in Oxford.
And even his final arrangements were completely characteristic of the unique, eccentric spirit of the man. He was buried in the cemetery at the Church of St. Peter and St. Paul in Great Missenden, but according to his granddaughter, the family gave him what they described as a sort of Viking funeral.
A Viking funeral. I love that. What did that involve?
Well, he was buried with several specific, highly personal items that tell you so much about his passions. His snooker cues,
Cues. Okay.
some very good Burgundy wine, chocolates, of course, HB pencils for writing, and a power saw.
A power saw. Why a power saw?
Who knows? But it's a beautifully odd mix, isn't it, of the intellectual, the decadent, and the practical. Apparently today, children continue to leave toys and flowers by his grave, recognizing him not just as an author, but as this truly eccentric figure, maybe even a friend.
That's lovely. His legacy is honored globally, too. In his birthplace of Cardiff, one of the modern landmarks was renamed Roald Dahl Place.
Using the Norwegian word for place, or square, right?
Sure.
Directly referencing his Norwegian roots, which were so critical to his mother's fateful decision all those years ago.
Exactly. And his popularity is sustained. In a 2017 UK poll, he was named the greatest storyteller of all time, ranking ahead of Dickens, Shakespeare, and even J.K. Rowling.
That's quite something, ahead of Shakespeare.
So if we look back at the fighter ace, the high-level intelligence operative, the inventor of life-saving medical devices, and the author we all know, the dark, complex trauma of his school years, the violence of the crash, the espionage of D.C., and the terrible personal grief he suffered.
They weren't separate from his fiction, were they?
Not at all. They were the very chaotic ingredients that informed his philosophy, his worldview. His work consistently demonstrates that playfulness and inventiveness are always prized over boring qualities like obedience and deference.
And his life was a testament to that principle. Creative disruption driven by chaos and powerful, channeled emotion was absolutely essential to his brilliance.
It seems that way. The light and the dark were completely intertwined. Okay, well, we'll leave you with this final reflection, something to maybe mull over that builds on his core philosophy, inspired by a line from his story, The Minpins. Those who don't believe in magic will never find it. Considering the extremes of Roald Dahl's life, the intense violence he witnessed and experienced, the profound loss he endured, and the sheer audacity of his imagination, we have to wonder how much of his own life's specific disruptive chaos was actually necessary to unlock the specific mischievous magic that he taught all of us to celebrate in the pages of his books.